This reading is from Censored 122. And before we begin, I'd like to read a few biblical quotes that are applicable. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good, from 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 21. He that oppresses the poor to increase his riches, and he that gives to the rich shall surely come to want. Proverbs 22, verse 16. He that makes haste to be rich shall not be innocent. Proverbs 28, verse 20. As the nail sticks to the stone, so sin sticks to buying and selling. Ecclesiastes 27, verse 2. And now to the article. There are no Christians on Wall Street, by William J. Eisman, Ph.D. Throughout this last presidential election cycle, people were blaming everything concerning the economy on President Obama. Republicans had a field day rewriting history. People exhibited short memories. So let's get it clear right up front. The financial crisis and near destruction of America's economy, with a massive loss of jobs and wealth and recession, occurred during G.W. Bush's presidency. The horrible economy that resulted was dumped on President Obama. These are the facts. It is true that everyone is entitled to his opinion, but we are not entitled to our own facts. Preceding these events was a 32-year period where the wealthy enjoyed a tax holiday and never paid their fair share of taxes. We developed a revenue problem. Even so, when George W. Bush took office, Bill Clinton left him a surplus. There was no deficit. In a few years, Bush's tax cuts produced a deficit. Under Bush, the two wars, Medicare Part D, were not funded. All of this President Obama inherited. His administration then honestly included everything in the deficits. This is true history. During President Bill Clinton's administration, there was extraordinary job creation between 1993 and 2000, while unemployment was below 4% for the first time since 1970. And remember, Bill Clinton left G.W. Bush a surplus, no deficit. Aren't Republicans supposed to govern in this way? We saw during this last presidential election a bizarre turn of events. We witnessed every day Mitt Romney shilling for billionaires and millionaires. And yet, when all was said and done, well, over 57 million people, ordinary people, voted for him. Over 90% of his voters will never be millionaires in their lifetimes. And hardly any will be billionaires. What is it in the character of certain people that makes it easier for them to accept taxing people living on unemployment insurance, but God forbid that they should fairly tax millionaires and billionaires? The Income Tax Amendment to the Constitution of the United States was specifically designed to tax those with money and to tax them progressively. The more you make, the more you pay. Somewhere along the way, millionaires and billionaires got lackeys like Grover Norquist and low information voters to hate government, their government, and also to hate taxing the rich. It's not just big government that these people hate, it's government, period. They want government small enough to drown in a bathtub. That is, destroy it. Before the propaganda concerning no taxing the rich, the average man and woman did not nor ordinarily weep for the man lounging on his yacht. Today, people of little means and calling themselves Christians and who are wrapped up in the propaganda of capitalism, the flag, mom, and apple pie, and who have never understood the Bible, shill for and support the rich. Obviously, they have never read Proverbs 22:16. He who gives to the rich shall surely come to want. And they have not seen Ecclesiastes 27, verse 2, as the nail sticks to the stone, so sin sticks to buying and selling. God says, the rich do not need our help. They have their consolation. So why this obvious disdain for the little guy and this fawning for the big guy in people who profess to be Christians? The 2007-2008 financial meltdown pointed up the fact that the conservative movement's signature free market ideas were discredited. The free market theory has proven itself to be a philosophy of ruination and fraud, because our form of capitalism is wrapped up in the propaganda of patriotism, mom, apple pie. Some of us are blind to the fact that our mutant form of capitalism is not intelligent, beautiful, virtuous, and it doesn't deliver the goods, said John Maynard Keynes. The United States financial system cheated the world to the very edge of the abyss. Of course, some apologists for Wall Street refused to understand what happened. Wall Street owned the government, and the financial system was not fair. All this because some believe capitalism to be God's economics. Again, we see people who are unfamiliar with the Bible distorting it and making claims that are false. A Christian would not do that. Capitalism is not God's economics. Back in the 1980s, Grover Norquist began signing up Republicans to a no tax increase pledge. Every week, Norquist and his Americans for Tax Reform meet to develop ways to defund and make weaker the United States government. They want to rob it of revenue, and they believe they are doing God's work. They are, in fact, idolaters, believing in the divinity of markets. Yet behind all this hype and hypocrisy, something more sinister is going on. There is the actual wish to destroy the U.S. government and limit a democratic participation by the masses. There is the belief that only the elites and corporations should run the small government that they envision. In fact, today, corporations have become our quasi-government. It should be clear to all by now who have some understanding of communist China that democracy is not essential to capitalism. In fact, our form of capitalism has enfeebled democracy. Despite Mitt Romney's pathetic corporations are people, my friend, they are not persons, nor are they citizens. We have come to a place where companies set the rules, they write legislation, they bribe politicians. How did we get to this place where companies had the power over our freedom, liberty, and survival? We have arrived at a place where Republicans speak of freedom. When they speak of freedom, they mean the freedom to shop. Teddy Roosevelt called giant companies malefactors of great wealth, while Franklin D. Roosevelt referred to them as economic royalists. Today, some call them job creators. G.W. Bush's tax cuts for the wealthy have been in effect for over 12 years. Where are the jobs? During the days of high marginal tax rates in this country, 91 and 78%, there were jobs and no constraints on the economy. Productivity soared. Real median family income doubled between 1947 and 1973. During these high tax rate times, companies made profits and provided jobs. They offered fringe benefits. Some of us learned that there is no connection between high taxes on the rich and job creation. It is a belief in a myth to say otherwise. It is a lie. A refresher course. Many people still remain confused about economic setups, even after Censored explained this in the past. A lot of people confuse totalitarian behavior with communism and socialism in their pristine forms, thinking each is some form of dictatorship. Communism is simply an economic setup where the means of production are owned by all the people. No totalitarianism there. Socialism is an economic setup where the state owns monopolies. Again, no totalitarianism there. Fascism is an economic setup where large corporations are extensions of the state and centralized government is in one person, a dictator. Mussolini called it corporatism. Smells like totalitarianism there. Today, the United States is a hybrid form of fascism, favoring corporations, the powerful, and the wealthy. Wall Street over Main Street. And this cannot be denied. By law, once banks had to give savers 5.25% interest. Since 1950, financial corporate profits have grown, as shown by the 2000-2008 financial crisis. It is clear the financial sector of our economy has grown too large and powerful. It has become too dangerous. Too big to fail is too big to be. America's GDP has tripled since the 1970s, and the Dow Jones rose from 1,000 to over 13,000 today. Typically, wages paid to employees are about 70% of the cost of doing business. But a dirty little secret that is not always expressed is that these costs are tax deductible. Productivity increased 80% between 1973 and 2006, but wages did not. Although the economy has grown in the last 30 years, mostly all the wealth has gone to the top. The share of wealth going to the top 1% since 1980 has tripled. In 2011, the median family income in the United States was $50,054, and this was 8% lower than in 2007. At this moment, there are 10.4 million homeowners who can't pay their mortgages, and there are 41.2 million Americans living below the poverty line, which is $23,021 for a family of four. The jobs that are gone are never coming back. And in looking back, we see that all this damage was done to the many by the few. Thanks to both political parties, the top 10% saw their incomes increase, while the 80% experienced declines in their income. These 80% were robbed. The answer to this situation is that many of that 80% see it as their job to protect billionaires and millionaires. For at least the next 3 years, the Federal Reserve will continue to give cheap money to banks and buy up their worthless mortgage-based securities. Meanwhile, foreclosures will continue to turn homeowners into renters. And in all of this, there's no regard for the common good. For those who pity the billionaires and millionaires, we must show them that there is a separation between capitalism and democracy, and we must guard that border between them. Christianity must be separated from capitalism. Those who pity the billionaires and millionaires must be forced to view our form of capitalism naked, without all its fake wrappings. They must be forced to see the bad and the ugly sides. And they must be forced to understand their role as pawn in all of this. Today, no job is safe. Corporations do nothing to advance the public good or anything in the public interest. This is why corporations do not belong in politics. It is a legal fiction that corporations are persons. Companies know nothing. Today, on the part of business and in politics, there is no real criticism of corporations. Not even when they contaminate our food and drug supply. They get away with murder. Sometimes they get a slap on the wrist, which is merely a cost of doing business. Hardly anyone ever goes to jail. We seem unaware that inflation, raising prices, is a tax. We seem not to understand that increasing borrowing reduces savings and merely boosts corporate profits. Is there not something wrong economically if higher investment spending lifts corporate profits but does not result in higher wages? Do we not realize that higher commodity prices result in higher inflation? It has now become apparent that our economic theories do not explain how our economies work. It is not a science. Corporation worship is a big part of the problem. In October 2009, the unemployment rate was 10.2%, and the job creation shortfall was 9.5 million. It cannot be said too often. The financial meltdown brought about by the greedy demons on Wall Street began during G.W. Bush's presidency in 2007. It exploded in September 2008. The finance-induced recession began in 2007. President Obama had nothing to do with this. Obama inherited the problem. The Bush financial meltdown undermined the real economy and caused massive declines in jobs, income, and wealth, all caused by the excesses on Wall Street. Fee earnings on Wall Street went from 40% already high to 70%. The mortgage-backed securities that Wall Street dealt with were too complicated and were not fully understood. These unregulated activities had deadly results. Only 12% of all income is in the hands of the bottom 40%, yet many of these vote Republican. Wall Street has gotten too big. It's a dinosaur eating up all our vegetation. And in the face of this, there was a deliberate failure to regulate. Contrary to Republican free market baloney, all markets must be regulated and must operate in the open. There must be neutral evaluations from rating agencies, appraisers, accounting firms, or else conflicts of interest become the norm. All must be honest and above board. This is where Wall Street encounters a problem. Our financial system is firmly rooted in greed, and greed is an attribute of Satan if we take the Bible as our guide. Those on Wall Street, however, call greed by another name. They call it self-interest. Between 1854 and 1945, the U.S. economy was in recession 42% of the time. These 22 recessions lasted an average of 22 months. From 1945 to 2007, there were 10 recessions, lasting on average 10 months. G.W. Bush's Greater Depression was the most expensive of all time. And yes, forget about the traditional definition of a depression. We are in a depression, and a jobless-seeming recovery is taking place. What this points up is the flaws in our present system. There is a better way. In 1960, the poverty rate was 23%. Today, over 46 million Americans are on food stamps. If America was a true Christian nation, there would be no poor within its borders. This is a fact. The median income in 2007 for a single adult household was $29,000, yet 91% of Americans believe they are middle class. Middle class would be about $30,000 to $70,000. In 1800, about 80% of workers were connected to the land. And in 1900, the figure was 40%, while today, it's 1%. Once upon a time, moving to the city and going to work for the man was touted as freedom. But cutting the umbilical cord to the land brought about a devious dependency. The issue of job security raised its ugly head. There is no true freedom or liberty without a connection to real estate, the land. According to the Bible, in the millennium, every man will have his own land and vine. Micah 4, verse 4. If he sells his land, it returns to him in 50 years, the Jubilee. Land represents security, freedom, and liberty. Today, when Republicans talk about freedom, they mean, of course, the freedom to shop. We are not limited in our choices of economic systems to only socialism, communism, fascism, or capitalism. There is a better way. One would think the so-called Christians in the Republican Party would honor God's economics. One would think they'd want to work diligently to rid the nation of poverty. One would think they'd work tirelessly to bring about individual freedom and liberty. But since God to them is merely a front man to suck in the uninformed, it's no surprise that they practice the devil's economics and that there are no Christians on Wall Street. The end.